Get started in just a moment. I'm really excited about our next presenter here with Woody Paik. He's from Curriculum Associates, and they have just been terrific partners since the very beginning of the STEM Leadership Alliance, and really believed in this work and said, you know what, we want to get behind you, and we really want to start to promote what you're doing here. And so as the lens that they love to look through is through this whole data lens. And so I think Woody is probably one of the best people to talk about that. So he's going to be coming on stage in just a moment. I want to remind everyone to please tweet at hashtag STEM Alliance 20. And also don't forget to register for the VIP chats that we're having on Thursday. If there's any questions about how to do that, we'll post some of that in the discussion sections just to give you instructions there. But, you know, meanwhile, keep the questions coming. Don't forget to engage in the lounge. I was just over there a few moments ago. But it's a great way to make some old connections with friends, but also some new connections as well. So I'm going to hop backstage and I'm going to invite Woody onto the stage. So thank you.
Hello, my name is Woody Paik. I'm with Curriculum Associates, and just want to make sure I'm up and running here, Kelly. Sorry, I'm just making sure we're up and running here. Sorry, someone from the STEM Alliance. I thought there was someone was going to kick off, or should I just begin?
Hi, Woody. I'm sorry, Kelly already introduced you, so you can just continue by further introducing yourself and keep on.
Okay, great. Thank you, Sal. Sorry about that. Okay, hello, everyone. My name is Woody Paik. I'm Executive Vice President with Curriculum. Are the makers of a program called iReady that you may be aware of. We work with about 10 million kids on the K-8 population, so about a quarter of the public school kids in America on digital assessments and digital instruction and traditional instruction for reading and math. And we're honored to be here. Appreciate everyone's time and appreciate everything the STEM Leadership Alliance is doing. With that, I'm going to go ahead and get started. The focus of my presentation is we work with about a quarter of the kids across the country, K-8, public school kids across the nation. So there's three big takeaways that I thought were interesting to share as it pertains to what's going on during the COVID situation, right? One is what tended to drive success with distance learning. So I'll share a couple of takeaways that we've learned from other districts. And then as far as real focus for 2021, the two big questions we find that people are trying to address, which is, if I'm the fifth grade teacher in the fall of 20, do I address fifth grade curriculum, or do I retread what was missed from fourth grade curriculum for my students? And then third is, I want to set ambitious goals that are also attainable. How do I do that, knowing that kids are entering my building with potentially more learning loss than they've had in the past, with much more variability than they've had in the past? Okay, so I'm going to share a couple quick takeaways that we picked up from other districts on this front. So I'm going to quickly just make sure you guys are aware contextually that we have digital assessments, digital online instruction, as well as teacher-delivered instruction, and they're all sort of connected. And that'll be relevant for a little bit of context when you see some of the takeaways from districts. So let's talk about distance learning and what we noticed. So as I said, we're working with about a quarter of the kids across the country, and just imagine this gray bar is typical usage before schools close. So think about it pre-March 15th, pre-March 12th, et cetera. So we're just generally calling that 100%. In week one of school closure, we found that usage was about 40% of that. By week 3 of school closure, it got up to about 62%. And by week 6, it got up to about 2/3. So it sort of peaked there and sort of tapered off. So kids were able to access our digital instruction, unfortunately, only at about 2/3 of the level that they did when schools were actually physically in session, which is tough to hear, obviously. The other thing to understand is what we did is we said, okay, well, that's interesting to understand that there's some usage and some access, but not nearly as much as we thought. And we thought, well, who's not accessing? Well, it's going to be from the kids who are generally from eligible for free and reduced lunch, generally focused on title schools, generally less affluent areas. So we decided to test that theory. So the same usage data, we just broke it up by median incomes associated with schools of less than 50,000, 50 to 75, 75 to 100, and 100 plus. Okay, so if I break that out, what does that tell me? It tells me this. For the less affluent kids, this was their rate of usage when schools were open, and the highest they got was about 57% of pre-closure levels by trying to access our programs remotely. All right, so they weren't able to access only at 57% of what their access was when schools were open. Okay, now if you look to the far right, these are the wealthier students where the median incomes associated with schools above 100,000. They were able to get to 90 to 93% of the pre-closure access. So it's a terrible story, all right? It's reflective of the digital divide that affects our access to hardware as well as Wi-Fi, that inhibits our ability to be effectively teaching our students, especially in a remote learning environment, as was dictated by COVID, okay? So some tough news to swallow, that digital divide is disproportionately affecting kids in this environment. The other thing to note is this is a measure still broken out across the 4 income brackets. This is a measure of time on task, how much time they actually spend on the program. And you can see in this range, I won't go into the details, but there's recommended time allotments for our digital instruction by student, by subject, by week. And generally, if you're in this sort of this perforated range, you're kind of in range of our recommendations. So what you'll see here is whether I was a less affluent kid, somewhere in the middle, or a more affluent kid, right? So everyone tended to want to dig in and actually utilize our instruction. And in fact, the kids that are less wealthy, who had a little bit less access, actually used our program a little bit more. So it's a bittersweet story, meaning kids that have less access in general, because they don't have the same kind of hardware and Wi-Fi, when they were given access, they want to learn. They want to dig in. It indicates that they're motivated and diligent about wanting to learn. Okay. What this graph indicates is for all the districts across America, right, we said how many of them sort of got within 10% of their pre-closure access to iReady, 40 to 50, 70, 80, 90 to 100, et cetera. Okay. And what we want to highlight is we had 209 districts where their access to our digital programs after schools closed was within 80 to 100% of what it was when schools were physically open. That's amazing, right? Given how quickly this happened, given how much people had to deal with, given the trauma, the fact that there were 209 districts who were able to replicate the access they had when school doors were still closed, even though people were working from a remote learning environment. Just a quick shout out, this is our top 10. So these are folks, I can't get into their specific data, but these are users of iReady who had between 80 and 100% of access to iReady after school doors physically closed, as they did before when schools were still open. Okay. One thing you'll notice is, there are some huge districts on here like Miami-Dade. There's some medium districts on here like Glendale out in California. You'll notice there's districts from different states. This is their free and reduced lunch perspective. So we have 22%, a low for St. Johns County, a relatively wealthy district in Florida, all the way up to 70% free and reduced lunch, Miami-Dade, with a relatively high population of relatively less affluent students, right? So their successes in providing digital access was not because they're wealthier, because they're bigger, because they were smaller, because they were in a certain area, whatever it may be. It's just incredible work from great leaders across these districts. If you want to dig in, a lot of this phenomenon that we saw was written up in a couple of different publications, one in EdSearch and one in EdWeek. And I just want to point out this particular quote. The district's iReady learning platform for grades K through 8 showed a consistently high level of engagement, with 90% or more students in every income bracket and zip code using the platform every week since building closed. That's a quote from the superintendent of Miami-Dade, was one of those districts who had just amazing levels of access continually, even when school doors closed. It's amazingly fantastic, heroic work from educators across the country. I'm not going to go through all of these. You'll all have access to my PowerPoint, but we are working on research. We're interviewing these 10 districts, trying to gather all the learnings and insights that allowed them to have that sort of continuity of learning in ways that were conspicuously positive. But I'll point out a couple of things that so far are common in terms of how they were able to bridge that digital divide. One is, for example, under planning, they did a whole series of scenario plannings. So in other words, it could be schools could be closed for a month, could be closed for the rest of the year. All these different scenarios could occur. Costs could go up, costs would go down. All these different things would happen, and most of them landed pretty quickly on the idea that schools were likely to be closed for an extended period of time. All right. I'll point out a couple of others. They really pushed vendor partners. So they pushed us, curriculum associates. They pushed folks who provide hardware, pushed folks who provide Wi-Fi and said, this is an emergency. This is America and you need to dig in. This is your duty. This is what we need to do. And in particular, they made sure that all the messages coming from us to their schools mirrored exactly what was coming from the district to their schools and teachers and staff. Okay, so there was this incredible focus on having the same messages over and over and over again about what the expectations were, what kids and teachers needed to be doing, and they used every channel they possibly could and were incredibly repetitive and clear over and over and over again. Okay, I'll mention again, I'm not going to go through all these, and this PowerPoint will be available to everybody, but they had a whole host of resources, leaders, principals, education technology folks, et cetera, whose job was to find out what are the best things happening in classrooms, because everyone was learning, right? What are the best things happening in classrooms? And their job was to find those things out and disseminate those learnings. So a couple of examples. We had a couple of districts who actually identified master teachers, some of their best teachers who were experts and had great success. And they had them actually teaching many more kids than just their own classrooms, right? So that you could obviously scale digital learning because of Zoom or GoToMeeting or Teams or whatever you use. They had them doing a lot of the first-time teaching for the more difficult topics. Maybe you're introducing Pythagorean theorem or whatever it may be, and they had master teachers doing that. And they had the more traditional teachers doing more small group, individual groups, small groups, coaching, support, etc. So a whole host of things that are underlying some of the successes we saw from those 209 districts who had uninterrupted learning, who had high access to all of their digital programs to support learning when COVID hit. Okay. The other thing, as I said, they really pushed us to really say, listen, what data can you track that we can communicate to schools, that we can communicate to parents, that we can communicate to leadership to know whether or not the program is being used in a high fidelity way? So one of the things we tracked for folks was how many minutes students were using the program, as well as their pass rates with our digital assessments and with our digital instruction, right? And we were able to correlate that to students who were growing at a higher level, right? So it was just a matter of them pushing us to understand what their messages were, what our messages were, and making sure those messages were consistent. And that obviously drove higher levels of access, higher levels of diligence and motivation, and I think over time, higher levels of learning. Okay, so this is not the end-all and be-all of all the things that are indicative of success with digital learning, but I thought sharing some of what we learned and the fact that some folks were able to confound the expectations of the digital divide and have tremendous success during this trying time would be beneficial and helpful perspective for folks who are really thinking about how they optimize digital resources and potentially distance learning this upcoming fall in 2021. Okay, next question is, again, I teed it up earlier, but if I'm the 6th grade teacher and I've got incoming 6th graders who missed a large portion of 5th grade, what do I teach? Am I supposed to just teach 6th grade? Am I supposed to retread 5th grade? Am I supposed to find some kind of balance? How do I do that? So districts said, you need to help me solve this problem. So we fast cycled some functionality support. support this issue. But the first thing we did in trying to think about a solution to that is we looked back at lots of different examples of school closures historically and tried to understand what did they learn. So one of the things we learned from Hurricane Katrina is a couple things. One, if you look up at the top, this is an academic paper written by a professor at the University of Washington. The degree of learning loss was not associated with income, school, age, grade, subject, etc. It was highly variable, kid by kid, was one thing we learned. Okay, so we couldn't make generalized statements about how to support all kids because all kids' needs are going to feel different. The second thing is, again, you have to decide, are you going to teach, my example, sixth grade teacher, all sixth grade day one, high level sixth grade rigor day one? Or are you going to try to fill in the gaps that you know are resonant within kids, right? How do you do that? Well, generally speaking, our view and what we've learned from successes people have had is when you focus on grade level instruction, we tended to have higher test scores the following spring. Okay, so if that's an indicator of learning, focusing on grade level instruction first tended to render better results. Skill recovery rendered poorer results, but those skills still need to be filled in and addressed. So you kind of need to do both, potentially with the prioritization of grade level instruction. So how do we do that? Well, it's really hard, as the title suggests here on this page. So let me just illustrate the problem. Let's just say, in this example, I'm the fourth grade teacher, and these are the lessons at fourth grade that I'm supposed to teach, right? You see place value, comparing whole numbers, rounding whole numbers, etc. Okay. Now, off to the left, what you'll see here is some of these lessons and standards are grade 4, some are grade 3, some are grade 2. Okay, so why do I show you this? These standards off to the left, right, are all the prerequisites required theoretically to have success understanding and learning the grade 4 lessons, right? But what's the problem here? If I try to fill in all these gaps, right, all the prerequisites, I will run out of time. I will never get to my grade level rigor. So if Hurricane Katrina results tell us that grade level rigor has to be priority number 1, how do I fill in enough of these gaps surgically in a way that makes sense, in a way that doesn't suck up all of my time, such that I can have success with this grade level instruction? So how do I do that, right? Again, if I spend all my time over here, I'll never get to grade level. If I only do grade level and I've got all these massive prerequisite holes, I'm not going to have a lot of success. So what do I do? Okay. So what we did is we constructed this map within our digital assessment platform. And we said, okay, if these are the standards you're teaching, instead of the 20 prerequisites you saw on the previous page, what are the handful that are essential? What are the handful that you kind of need to fill in the gaps so that you have a good chance of the grade level instruction being successful? So instead of 20 prerequisites, we synthesize it down to a smaller number based off what you're teaching that particular week or month, okay? And then we said, based off our digital assessment that we provide, we're able to say, okay, well, of those essential skills, those prerequisites around place value and adding, subtracting within 1,000, as an example, which kids sort of understand that and are in group A, which kids kind of partially understand it and they're in group B or group C, and which kids need a ton of remediation and support, which is group D. And then we said, for each one of the groups, what are the recommended resources to address those particular prerequisites? Okay, so we're taking an assessment and we're saying, which prerequisites does each kid need so that your grade level instruction can be successful? That's the general idea, right? So if you think about it, if this is what I'm teaching, adding and subtracting whole numbers, here are the essential prerequisites. So we make it such that there are resources available for each prerequisite. So what are we really trying to do? We're trying to ensure that grade level instruction is the priority, and that I'm filling in gaps as quickly and as efficiently and as in a data-driven way as possible, such that my grade level instruction is going to be successful, right? If you just do grade level, you don't fill in any gaps, that's probably a problem. If you just fill in gaps and don't do grade level, you're going to run out of time, and that's going to be a problem. So we're trying to help people figure out how do I balance that, right? So that was probably the biggest fundamental question we're hearing in terms of the support people need to think about how to launch their strategies in back to school this fall of 20. Okay. And it's probably worth noting for those of you who are members of the Council of Great City Schools or follow the great work of TNTP or Student Achievement Partners, this notion of prioritizing grade level, but dipping into the prerequisites surgically, carefully, in a data-driven way, is reflected in the guidance we're seeing from all three of these organizations to address, I think, what's increasingly referred to as unfinished learning. Okay, so those are great reads if you want to take a look at those as well. So I'm going to go ahead and dive into the last question here, the last thing that we were pushed to help address with districts this year, which is like, hey, listen, I'm walking into the school year and my kids are likely farther behind than they have been in the past. My kids, the variability of how they're behind are greater than they have been in the past. But I still want to have high expectations for kids. I still want them to have a great year this year. And I still want to set goals that are reflective of those high expectations. So how do I set appropriate goals given I don't know where I'm starting with these kids because they've had such variable experiences and schools have been closed for some time? Tough question, okay? So let's start with this quote. It's from a recent article from a month or two ago from the New York Times. It's from a teacher. And I just want to read this. It's a tough message here. It says the success stories that get publicized, it basically says that when you hear about a kid from an impoverished neighborhood in a tough environment that does incredibly well academically, that it's kind of a one in a million. It's kind of a Halley's Comet moment, if you will. Okay. And it says generally, the article talks, this teacher's perspective is generally rich kids do well and poor kids don't do as well. And generally rich kids stay rich and poor kids stay poor. And so that your zip code affects your outcomes academically more than any of us would like to believe is true, but is true. Okay, so that's what this teacher is saying. So the thing I want to point out is I believe intrinsic to the DNA of any great teacher is to believe that no matter the circumstances, that any kid can just beat the pants off of what they did last year. That any kid is capable of having a breakout year and fundamentally changing the trajectory of what they're capable of achieving and just having an incredible year that changes the trajectory of their life, okay? So we can't have this fatalistic view that represented in this quote. We have to believe that kids are capable of more than they have in the past. That's my humble opinion. And I worry, right, that that defeatist view or that fatalistic view or sort of the antithesis of growth mindset is more likely to be true in the post-COVID environment than it has been in the past because you're dealt a tougher situation. Okay, so given that, I think the attitude we want represented in the world is more appropriately stated by this teacher, which is when a kid says, I don't want to or I can't, teacher takes it upon herself to understand that her responsibility is to make the kid believe they're capable, right? That no matter the circumstance, no matter the child, no matter the situation, no matter if learning loss is enormous in your school because of COVID or whatever it may be, we want everyone to sort of embody this notion that's reflected here in this teacher, right? That says no matter what's put in front of me, I believe that any kid can have a breakout year, okay? And then I can enable that as a teacher. Now, what you saw from the quote from the New York Times is sometimes data can work against us because you see all these general statements about struggling kids struggling in perpetuity, right? So the idea is, can we use data to debunk that idea, to help teachers believe, to help leaders believe, to help educators believe that anything's possible with any kid, no matter their circumstances? And I think we can, right? So our particular solution, and frankly, I'm going to talk to you about principles here about our solution. There are probably many programs you can use, and that's fine with me. But I have very strong opinions about what needs to be resident within those programs. So let's take this as an example. Here's Danielle Baker. She's in 5th grade. She just took, in this case, an iReady assessment. Okay. First thing you'll note is the green area represents 5th grade, being on grade level. And the blue area, the denomination here indicates that she's currently operating at the 4th grade level. Okay, so we believe, first of all, even given COVID, even given the trauma, even given all the barriers that are stacked against us, we still need to believe that maybe not right away, maybe the journey's longer, maybe the hill is taller to climb, but we have to believe that we can get kids to grade level because that's still the goal. And that's a goal that we all believe are representative of the skills required to be successful in life. So we believe we still need to be thinking about grade level as the ultimate goal. Okay. But we also want to think about growth. So we provide what's called a typical goal, which is other kids like Danielle, a fifth grader operating at the fourth grade level. What is typical of kids like Danielle? Where do they land at the end of the year? Okay, that would be different for reading versus math. It would be different for fifth grade versus first grade versus eighth grade, whatever it may be, because it's typical of kids that look like this, in this case, Danielle. Okay, now what is the problem with this typical goal? All right, what you'll notice is I start out by saying green is grade level. Typical does not get Danielle to grade level. Okay, that doesn't mean that if Danielle doesn't get to typical, she didn't have a good year. It means she had a good, solid year, right? But she's not at grade level. And the problem with typical goals is that you can hit typical goals every year for the rest of your life, and you'll never get to grade level. And that's unfortunately true because kids who are behind typically don't catch up, right? So as a result, we said, like, we get it. Typical or an average or a normative goal, however, whatever you want to call it, is valuable information as reflective of a good year. But we need to have a catch-up goal, and that's denominated by stretch. So stretch is, hey, we took millions of kids and said, hey, listen, for all the Danielles in the world who are fifth graders operating at the fourth grade level, let's only look at those kids who actually caught up. What did they achieve? And that's denominated by the stretch goal. So it's other kids like Danielle who actually caught up. And in this case, the stretch goal gets you to grade level, right? So in our view, whatever you use, okay, we need to focus on the idea that we still have high expectations for kids, like that teacher of the year, that anything is possible, that we can have a miracle, we can have a great, great year for any kid. We want to reward a good year or a typical year as a solid year, but we need to give more ambitious goals, what we call catch-up goals that we're calling stretch in this particular case. That's our view of the world, okay? Now, why do we feel so passionately about it? If I look at this curriculum audit from a third party of, say, Columbus City Schools in Ohio, right, what they're saying is, these quotes say, I'm hitting all my growth goals, but it's not making a dent in terms of grade level as denominated by their state test, okay? Why is that? It's the same reason that this typical goal doesn't get you to grade level, right? They need a stretch goal, something that moves them up in the world, okay? Now, these typical goals or normative goals are based off averages, and be leery of averages, right? And what I mean by that is this. Here's Smarter Balance, the big Smarter Balance test used by about a dozen states or so out west, right? These bars indicate, let's say Kelly moves from third grade to eighth grade, and she moves up in the world in terms of norms every year, 53rd, 54th, all the way to 58th. These are the cut scores for SBAC, for Smarter Balance, for actually passing. So Kelly moved up in the world every year normatively, but she got farther from grade level. So be wary of typical or normative goals in isolation because they can be misleading. I'm going to fast forward through this given time. So obviously you can tell we're sort of passionate about the idea that we need to have high expectations no matter the situation, no matter how difficult our lives are, that we as educators need to instill into children the notion that they can achieve more than they did last year, that they can have great breakout years in terms of growth and attainment of grade level proficiency, even though it's a tough time, okay? There are many reasons we believe that. And one of the reasons is because of these 5 studies, or these 5 pieces of literature that probably many or most of you have read. You look at John Hattie's work in terms of visible learning, right? Teacher and student view of what they're capable of achieving is number 2 and number 3 on his list of over 250 of the largest effect sizes of more than 250 different factors to drive growth. High expectations are the largest driver from TNTPs and opportunity myth. The growth mindset work from Angela Duckworth and Carol Dweck are all focused on the idea that we give instill in the idea, this growth mindset, that you can achieve more than you might have believed. This is a great new study from Fordham that talks about the fact that teachers who had higher grading standards in algebra had greater outcomes, not only in the current year, but in future years, right? So there's lots of research that says having these high expectations is critical to having the success we're looking for. Last thing I'll say, and I'll sort of close up shop, this is from Learning Heroes. They're a great organization, you're familiar with them. But this says that 92 and 93% of parents believe their kids are at grade level. Okay, that's just not true. It's not remotely true if you look at how we measure grade level. Okay, so one of the reasons I point this out is we have to have those high expectations, and we have to have honest conversations with students and with parents and with the community about how kids are doing. Otherwise, we fundamentally mismanage expectations, as reflected in this view that 92% of kids are on grade level for math, because that's not even remotely accurate, unfortunately. Okay. Well, with that, I conclude my comments today. Again, I just wanted to recap. I talked a little bit about learnings that we've discovered from districts as they've executed distance learning programs during the COVID crisis. We tried to talk about how we're trying to address two big questions about how I balance unfinished learning with grade level priorities. And we talked about what can you look for within your assessment partners and your assessment programs you use to ensure that we're setting appropriate, ambitious, but attainable goals for students, even in a tough environment. Thank you all for your time. I'm butting up right against time here, and I don't know if there's any questions or anything else we need to wrap up here, Kelly or Sal.
Yeah, no, thank you, Woody. I mean, I find that so informative, and as always, I absolutely love the data and what you were sharing, and I think this is something that we need to continue to have a conversation around, and I think it's also really important for parents too. You know, we need to have a deeper understanding and a dialogue there. So I want to thank you for that. This was a great presentation. And, you know, you had some great attendance there and some great numbers. And so if there are any questions, we're going to forward those to you through the discussion room and chat and ask you to get back. So we're going to keep posting that, and that's really for everyone to know. So with that, thank you so much. And you can just click on that leave button. And if you want to come back in and join, you can join on another link there. So you're getting all those little thumbs up if you see them, which is really fun.
Okay, great. Thank you, Kelly. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. All right, everyone. Well, our next